We're going to do a little bit more on the walking bass lines that we were doing last time. Let me try to get the angle a little bit better so you can see the C bass. But last time we were talking about jazz bass lines, and we were doing things like root third, fifth third, and the minor version. Then we were doing another one was just walking up the scale. So if it was up the C major scale from A minor, then we'd skip over a note and come back to the note. So root of the chord, root, second, third, fifth, then come back to the fourth. We did another one where we did the arpeggio up, root, third, fifth, then a half step back to get to the next chord. And then we did a descending one where you start higher and you just walk down the scale and you end up there. So if we're in the key of C major, you're not playing any sharps or flats, so you'd just be going A, G, F, E, D to get basically from one chord to another. So I hope you guys can hear me and hopefully see me. I know it's a little cramped in the car and getting the angle is kind of tricky, but don't mind the bicycle in the background either. I was riding it earlier today. Okay, so yeah, so basically we're just going to add to that, but I'm going to give a couple examples of what we already did last week, and then we'll jump into some more stuff. So we were taking the first four chords from Fly Me to the Moon. That's an A minor 7, going to a D minor 7, going to a G dominant 7, and I'm just arpeggiating the chords, don't worry about this for now, and then to a C major 7 chord. So last time we weren't worried about the 7th, we were just basically going, okay, A minor, D minor, G major, and C major. But I think today we're going to add some lines that may involve the 7th being in there. So root, third, fifth, 7th of a minor 7 chord, that would be an A, a C, an E, and a G. Okay, A, C, E, G, or we could just look at this pattern that I'm doing. Pointer finger to pinky, doing that 1 finger per fret thing, right? So pointer finger, skip over these two, go to the pinky, then go to your ring finger on the next string, and then your pointer finger on the next string. That's your minor 7 pattern, okay? For a major 7, you would do, starting on the middle finger, I'm going to do it over G since, well, I'll do it over C since we have a C major 7 chord later. So you start on C with your middle finger, so that's 3rd fret on the A string, middle finger. Then you go back to your pointer finger on the next string. Then you go up to your pinky, and then you go up to your ring finger on the next string. So don't change strings unless I said to. So 3rd fret A string, 2nd fret D string, 5th fret D string, and 4th fret on the G string. So that's a C major 7 pattern. But look at what my fingers are doing. Middle, changing strings, going to pointer, then going to pinky, then going to the next string and going to ring finger. So using that grid, I'm starting on my middle finger for the major chords, but I'm starting on my pointer finger when I do the minor 7 arpeggios. Okay, and then a dominant 7, we'll be doing that over G. So you're going to do middle finger, then you're going to go to the next string and do pointer, and then pinky. And this is the only thing different from the major 7 to the dominant 7 is instead of using your ring finger, you're going to do your middle finger note on the next string. Okay, and those are basically the only 3 patterns we're going to use for now. You might have to learn more if you're going to do diminished chords or anything like that. I'm going to see if that makes the lighting any better. It's okay, kind of a backlit sort of thing. Okay, but yeah, basically, and by the way, feel free to say hi in the chat. I know I jumped right into the lesson on this, but yeah, we're going to be using those 7s this time. But now let's recap what we did last time. So here's what it would sound like if I varied them up over over the Fly Me to the Moon changes: A minor 7, D minor 7, G7, and C7. So here's one option for a bass line. Right? I guess I could end it with that. Okay, so one more time. Here I did the arpeggio up, then I went down. So that was a chromatic passing tone down, which means that note didn't have to be in the chord because I outlined the chord, and then I just had one note left to lead into the next chord. I knew I was going to D, and I ended up on an E note, so all I had to do was chromatically walk back. Boom, 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 boom. So once again, these are the first 4 chords of Fly Me to the Moon. I think it's also the chords for Flowers and for the first 4 chords of, what's it called? I Will Survive. So just kind of knowing that, you might be able to play this in other contexts, but as far as a walking line goes, it'll be good for Fly Me to the Moon. So pointer going to pinky, then going to rings. That's just our arpeggio on root 3rd, 5th of an A minor chord, and then I'm just doing a note in between that 5th, going to the next chord, which happens to be a D. So A to D is here. So from A to D, you're moving up an interval of a 4th, and when you go up an interval of a 4th on the bass, it's always the note directly, I'm going to say physically below it. So it's like it's the same fret, 1 string thinner, would be a 4th up. So if you're going from A to an A minor 7 to a D. And so basically, yeah, I did the root 3rd, 5th, then a chromatic note down. Then here I decided to do the arpeggio, root 3rd, 5th, then just go back to the 3rd, because it kind of surrounds that note and leads to the next note, which is G. Hopefully this makes some sense. Let me know if I'm jumping all around. If you saw last week's lesson, I explained it in a lot more detail. And so then from G going to C, because those are the next chords, I walked down a C major scale, since all these chords are part of the C major scale. So this song is in the key of C, and if you know that ahead of time, it really helps. And then, so from G getting down to C, if you're descending like that, rather than going G up in pitch to C, I'm going G to the lower C, I can walk down the scale. So that was another option that we had last time. And there was one option that I didn't throw in here. Let me see what it was. It was that. So basically, instead of doing the arpeggio, you could literally just walk up the scale. But if you realize, oh, I'm going to end up on this note with still 1 beat to spare before I need to get there, you can just skip over that note in the scale and then come back to it. So this would be like, of the A minor, this is the root, the 2nd or the 9th, whatever you want to call it, then the 3rd, and then instead of going to the 4th note of that scale, oops, that would already be D, and I need to get there 1 beat after that, I'm going to skip over it and go to E and then come back to D. Boom, 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 boom. So if you learn these patterns and you learn them with this like specific, like I'm starting with my pointer finger for minor, I'm starting with my middle finger for major, then you can kind of just learn these as words and put them in place based on what chords you're going with. So it's kind of like you could think of these, all of these as, oh, this is a minor word going to the next root note of the next one. So if you have an A minor, you can either go boom, 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 like we just did, or you can do the arpeggio one, boom, 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 or you can do the arpeggio and then do a chromatic passing tone down rather than going back to the middle note of the arpeggio. Boom, 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 and then it leads into the other note. So getting from a minor chord to the next chord, regardless of what it is, if it's a 4th away, you can do any of those. Okay, then the other thing you could do is you can walk down whatever scale you're in to get to the next one. So if we're going from an A to a D, we don't really have a lower D, so that's why I didn't do it there. But if we wanted to go from D to G, and we know we're in the key of C, well, we can go descending from D down C major. So It's just the alphabet backwards without hitting any sharp or flat notes. So we've got D, then C, then B, then A, and then you'd end up at the end of the previous alphabet, boom, you landed on G. So those particular words can get you from one minor chord to the next major chord. So just think of those kind of like they're words, right? Okay, and that's when you're going that interval of a fourth, which is really, really common in jazz. So this will work in a lot of places if you do that. So that's kind of why I'm teaching it this way. Now, now what I want to do is just talk about some other ideas that you can do. There's one that's like this. And that one is still for minor. You're doing the root of the chord up higher. So you could start there instead of starting on that A. Then you're going to go to the seventh, which is why we needed to know that seventh now. So you got the root of the chord, you're going back to the seventh, then you're going down to the fifth of the chord. So these are intervals, these are not, these are chord tones, these are not frets. So you might notice I'm saying fifth, but I'm on the seventh fret. It's the fifth of the chord. So root, third, fifth, seventh octave. So root, third, fifth, seventh, eighth, as you could think about it. So of the A chord, I'm starting on the root, up the octave. So you could call it the 8 if you wanted to. Then you go to the 7. Oh, and by the way, these are coming from the scale that has the same name as the chord. So if you have the A minor scale, and I'm saying like the 8th, that's the 8th note of the A minor scale. And then the 7th of the A minor scale. And then the 5th, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the A minor scale, the 5th note that happens in that scale. But I'm doing them 8th, 7th, 5th. Okay, and then after the 5th, we're gonna add that chromatic passing tone that we did before, just to lead into D. We're still going from an A minor chord to a D minor chord. So that's another one we can do if we don't want to walk down the scale. So before we had this option, but now we have this option as well. Okay, so basically the way it works with walking lines is you learn these little words, or you can learn the rules as to why these words work. But I think both are good. So you could memorize these ideas, these patterns and shapes first, and then go back and learn the theory, although I'm going to try to explain a little bit of it as I go along. So basically, if you're doing the A minor 7th chord, let's just go back to the arpeggio of that. Root, 3rd, 5th, 7th octave. You can use those chord tones basically for the first note and the third note are the important ones to be chord tones. And this is just a rule that helps you get along. You can break these rules, you can bend them slightly, but in general, as you're getting started, this might help. You want the first note of so let's say you have 4 notes in each measure of a walking line, right? 4 quarter notes, boom, 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 boom. So the first note most likely will be the root, right? So for now, we will hit the root of the chord on the first beat. The second beat we can kind of get away with a little bit. It should probably be from the scale, but it doesn't have to be from the chord. So that was why you could walk up the scale or walk down the scale. The third note should be a chord tone. And then we have a little bit of freedom on the 4th note. The 4th note just needs to lead to the next chord in a nice way. So when you're going down the scale, it's a whole step away from the next note that you're going to, right? Sometimes it's a half step, just depending on where you're walking to and from. But in this case, it's a whole step away, so that's pretty good. And then we do the chromatic note. The 4th note is a half step away from where we're going to. So both of those are very strong as long as the notes before them are chord tones. So if we have an A minor 7, all 3 of those notes in this new pattern that we're doing are in that chord. A, G, E. A is the root or the 8th note of the A minor scale. G is the 7th note, and this is a 7th chord, so it's in the chord. And then the 5th is in the chord as well, because most chords are comprised of the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and if they're 7th chord, they'll have the 7th as well. So Those 3 notes are all in the chord, and then we use a chromatic passing tone to get to the next root note of the next chord. And that's a really strong way to get there. Even though that note's not in the chord, it's not even in the key that we're in, we can use it just as a device to get us to the next root note that we're going to be building off of. Okay, so that means when we're starting this line, instead of going or did I redo that one? Okay, there's the other one that I didn't do. Okay, instead of doing any of those things, we can do the descending ideas. So that's just going down the scale, and then the one I just talked about, root, 7th, 5th, chromatic tone, boom. And it works really good over minor chords, and it works pretty well over dominant chords as well. So in this particular pattern, we could do that over our A minor chord. We could do it over our D minor chord. We could even do it over our G to get to our C chord, but I wouldn't do that over the C chord. So it's different because it's just like if you do it over the C chord, the 7th ends up here. So root, 7th, 5th, all that's fine. But for some reason that chromatic tone, I don't know, it's so much tension that it almost makes a major chord sound less pretty. I guess technically you can do it. I just wouldn't personally, right? It's not a sound that I like. Instead, what I would do is probably jump down to the 3rd of the chord and keep every single note of that part of the walking line as part of the arpeggio. Because then you're still a half step away from the next chord that you're going to, which would be an F chord. I know we didn't really talk about that, and we're not trying to go that far into the progression. But yeah, you could do that. Okay, so let me try making a line where we just do this pattern. It's gonna sound too repetitive, but maybe you'll get the idea. It's also, I'm gonna run out after the D minor, so I might have to do something creative when I get to the G chord. So maybe I'll do 2 examples. Here's the first one, starting on an A. So we're going A minor 7 to D minor 7 to G7 to C7. C major 7, sorry. Let's try that again. A minor 7 going to D minor 7, going to G dominant 7, which is just G7, and then C major 7 after that. So here we go. I might have to do an extra 8th note to get up to this other note. So I don't really like it over the dominant chord as much, because I think there's a better way to outline the chord. But with the minor, that works, right? So I'm just doing that same pattern. Root, 7th, 5th, chromatic passing tone. Then now I'm on a D minor chord. Root, 7th of the D minor chord now. It's the root and the 7th of that chord. Then 5th of that chord. So our little word, it would be like starting on the root note that you're coming from. So if it's an A minor 7, you're starting on an A. Start higher up so that you have room to go lower in pitch. Root, 7th, 5th, chromatic passing tone and 4th. But you can just memorize this finger pattern. Ring finger, go into pointer finger, then go to the next thicker string. Ring finger, middle finger, pointer finger. So you can know the theory, or you can just memorize these little things as words, and as long as you start on the right letter name and have room to do the rest of the pattern, it will work. So it depends on how much theory you want to know, right? I think there are some people that probably just learn the geometric patterns, and maybe they don't go past that. I'm not sure. To me, there's a benefit in going past that, but I just realized I could get more light in here. I had the sun visor down. But yeah, to me, the more theory you know and why you're doing it, the more it can lead you to kind of be creative with the line, but still knowing how you're outlining the chords as you're going to things. So now we've got a bunch of tricks up our sleeve. Let's see how many that is. Going from one minor chord to another minor chord, we have the arpeggio first, root 3rd, 5th, 3rd, right? So play it slowly so you can see what I'm doing. Pointer finger going to pinky on the same string, going to ring finger, coming back on the next string, coming back to pinky on the original string. That's one pattern that we've got. Then we've got walking up the scale, skipping over the note that we're going to end up on and coming back to it. And then you end up on that one. So that's going to be another one. Then we've got the arpeggio with the chromatic passing tone down. So far that's 3, right? Arpeggio, arpeggio with chromatic passing tone, walking up the scale and jumping up to the note and then coming down, okay? And then we've got going backwards now, so starting on a higher A. That's just walking down the scale. Root. You don't really have to think about this in terms of the chords. You're just walking down the A minor scale. So we're in the key of C, which is the same as A minor. A natural minor. We're just walking down that scale. So you could look at that from a minor chord going down to the other one. It would change if you were going from D minor to the G7, because from there, the 6th of the scale that we're in, sorry, that's confusing. Because we're in the C major scale, even when we're playing on the other chords, so even when we're playing this D minor chord, we're still pulling the notes from a C major scale and not from the A minor. So that one is kind of like you have to alter that one knowing where you are in the scale. That one helps to know theory. The ascending ones, I think you could just memorize those patterns like words. The minor one, it's kind of like if you're going from a minor to another minor, most of the time you can get away with this one. Ring finger, pointer finger, then on the next string, pinky, ring, pointer. But if you're going from a minor chord to a 7, meaning like a dominant 7 chord, not a specifically fully major, then you're going to be using your pinky on the root notes if you're on a D. So it's almost like it matters more what chords you're going to when you're using the descending pattern going down the scale. Okay, but I digress. Going back to that, we've got another descending thing that we can do. So we had 3 ascending ones, descending down the overarching key that you're in, which in this case is the key of C major. And now we have another one, which is that. So that one that we just talked about, where we do 3 chord tones, root, 7th, 5th, but then we hit a chromatic passing tone until we get to the next note. So all of these work if the letter name of the chord you're going to is 4 letters in the alphabet away from the first one, counting the first one. So if it's an A going to a D, A, B, C, D. Okay, that's 4 away. If it's D going to G, D, E, F, G, right? Okay, so we're still going in the alphabet. We started on a D, we ended on a G. If it's, let's see another example, G going to C, here's why that works. G is the end of our alphabet, so we'd start over after it A, B, C. So G to C is a 4th away as well. So if it's 4 letters in the alphabet away, let me try to say that again, that's generally going to be a 4th away, and you can either walk down the overarching key that the whole song is in, or you can I can't remember the reason why I was going over that. Sorry guys, this is a really dense theory lesson, but I hope it's making sense. But yeah, that's another thing that you can do. So I think I'm just going to give examples of mixing these up now. So let's do that. That's one example. Here's another one. Okay, here's another one. Okay, and I'm just making them up as I go along. Let's start here and do the scale descending one. In fact, we can descend down the scale a good bit. Okay. Are there any that I missed that I forgot to do? Let's just try mixing them up a little bit differently. Okay. Okay. But you kind of get the idea. You're using these as little words. So you could start by going through doing the same word for every single one, unless you run out of spaces to do it. And then you can kind of like mix and match. So recapping the last lesson, I'm going to do all 4 of the lines that we did last time, all the way through the pattern. And I may have to jump up the octave to do to get the pattern to work, because I might run out of notes otherwise. So what I'll do is I'll do this little 8th note jump where I go boom, ba-dum, bum, bum. So the higher octave will be the second 8th note, and then everything else will be quarter notes. Okay. So the first 2 notes will be 8th notes if I end up having to do that. So first we have the arpeggio line. Cool. So now we've got the walking up, skipping over a note and coming back. Whoops, I didn't skip over the note. Okay, and then now we have the arpeggio and then descending into the chromatic note. And I wouldn't do it here. I mean, you could, I just wouldn't. Okay, and then now we have the descending ones. So let's just do the one where we go down the scale. Whoops, I didn't do it right. Descending down scale. I'm gonna jump up the octave here. So you could literally descend down the scale the whole time. If we started on a higher A, I wouldn't even have to do that octave jump. So this is just starting on A, hitting the root note of every chord on beat 1 of each measure. So we got A, D, G, C, and then we'll end up on an F, even though we're not going that far in the song. So that's a descending scale. Now I'm going to do the descending where it's like the root of the chord, the 7th, and the 5th, and then the chromatic note going to the next one. And I'm not doing it on the C chord because I just think it sounds bad on a major. Just kind of weird to me. I would rather go. Some people might argue with me that it's perfectly fine to do that. It's just not something that I particularly like the sound of. That's the other thing. Like using words when you're coming up with a sentence, right? You can pick the words that you want to use in this walking line. So if you don't like and you want to avoid it at all costs, then you don't need to use that word. You have other words you can use in the place of it. If you decide that you like it in certain parts of the walking line, but not at the beginning of it, or not, you know, under certain parts where someone is singing, then you can change that way as well. So hopefully this kind of gives you an idea of just how to use all these concepts. But I know I really only added this one today. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is you're not always going from one chord to another from every measure, right, in a jazz song. It's not always moving like that. Sometimes you'll stay on a chord for 2 measures. So what do you do in the case of staying on a chord for 2 measures? Well, let's use that rule of first note is going to be the root note of the chord. The 3rd note needs to be a chord tone, okay? And then the 4th note needs to be a something that leads into the next chord, right? So one thing you could do if you're stuck on a chord and you're going like let's say you're on A minor for 2 measures instead of 1 measure. So this is not in Fly Me to the Moon, but it might be in some other songs, right? Well, you could go root, third, fifth, seventh. Root is one thing you could do, but if you did that over and over, it'd probably get kind of boring. Sorry. Kind of weird to jump down there too. So we have one way to kind of, if you know you're only gonna be on it for 2 measures, you could go. Right, so that's one thing you could do. You could do that over a major 7 chord too. Right, and then as you're going to the next chord, you could walk down the scale or something. Right, so if you knew that you were going to a chord a fourth away after that, but you're not always going to a chord a fourth away. It's just that these are good ways to start with learning. So basically, you just need a trick, a word, if you will, to get to anything that's a certain distance away from where you're at. So let's say we're on an A and we're doing A minor, and instead of going to the 4th, we're going to the 5th. You could just walk up the scale, right? And then you end up on that one. Okay, what if we're going from an A to a B? Well, you could do the arpeggio thing, because if you check that out, it leaves you a half step away from the next note. So you don't really need a different word for that one. You can just do the root, third, fifth, third word to get from there to there if you're doing the minor chord. If you're doing a major chord, it's not as nice. So you may want to just do this little cliche thing that some people do in country lines, which is going backwards a note to the major 7th, coming back to the root, and then doing a chromatic tone that leads nicely to the note that's just 2 frets away. So this kind of involves you knowing the different intervals, right? So you need to know if you're going a whole step away, if you're going a minor third away, if you're going a 4th away, if you're going a 5th away, then you need different words to get to different ones of those, but you're still basically outlining the chord with notes and then leading into the next one via a chromatic note or just something a little bit different, right? So you can also kind of split arpeggios up. So if you're going root, third, fifth, you could also start on the upper root and jump down to the third, fifth. It's just you don't want to do it a whole bunch. Like you could go, but I wouldn't want to do that on every single chord. You know, anyway. So basically you just need some words that lead you to those things, or you can kind of get the idea of, oh, okay, I'm hitting chord tones for most of the measure, and then using that last note or the last 2 notes maybe to lead to the next chord. So if we're going from A to anything else, right? So a minor second's here. So if we're doing A, we might just do a root and then come up to it. That's one way. Or you could go, let's see, that same thing. Or depending on what key you're in, depending on where in the scale that A minor chord is. So that would be if a A was going to a B flat. Sorry, if it's just a half step away. If you're going a whole step away, you can do that root, third, fifth, third. And then if you're on a minor chord going to something else, then that's just a half step away from that one. So that would be the one I'd probably use there as a start. Okay, what if you're going to the minor third? Then you may not want to hit it early. You may want to go something like that. Or you could really cheat and do root, root, then go up a whole step and then do that. I know that's not outlining the chord how I was saying before. Oh, you're not hitting a chord tone on beat 3, but it's just a very obvious outlining kind of. It's a very strong line that leads you there. So it's kind of enough to work for that. So that's what you do if it was a minor third, if it was a major third, or something like that maybe, or something where you're walking down into that chord tone. That's something else you could do. So then we're back to our fourth now. We know what we can do with the fourth. We have a whole bunch of those. Okay, so then what do we do for a sharp 4? Most of those will still work. So let's see. So that's an interesting one. That one's kind of hard to do, right? Because that doesn't sound as good, so I'd probably scratch the arpeggio one leading to that. But I might go, I might just repeat the root note. So root, third, fifth, and then you're a half step away from that one. So that's what I would do if it was a tritone away. So hopefully this will help somebody. I know right now the people that are watching aren't really, maybe this is too much theory, a little too dense. What if you're going from a root and then you're ending up on the fifth? That one's tougher because you want to try not to hit the fifth until you get there. It's kind of tricky. That one's a little tough, right? You could just walk up the scale. You could do a little chromatic thing to get to it there. Okay, so what about for a minor sixth? Let's see. Could do something like that, not super strong. So yeah, those are a little bit trickier to use the rules that we had before to get there. Not super strong, but you could use it. But going from a root to a fifth is less common in jazz and more common in blues. If it's a major, sorry, we're talking about the flat 6, not the fifth. I guess you could do root, third, fifth, flat 6. That's one option. So you could just, so sometimes the way you get around these things and still making them work with the pattern is just doubling the first note. So if there are certain intervals where you're like, oh, I know how to get to a note that's a fourth away, but how do I get to all these other ones within 4 beats, just going from the root of one measure to the root of the next? There are a lot of little things you can do, but once again, it's like if you understand the concepts, it kind of helps a little bit. Sometimes doubling the root is the answer. So if we're going all the way that one, to the flat 6, we can use those kinds of things where we're just doubling the A and then using other chord tones and then getting to that one from either a half step or a whole step away. Okay, so that was the minor 6. What if we need to get to a major 6th? Probably just something like that. And if you want to be more accurate and actually hit the chord tones, you may just want to double the root, then double the flat 7, and then you'll be there. So it's still kind of like following the rules where we said beat 1, it'll be the root note. Beat 3 will still be a chord tone. We're not really too worried about what beat 2 is doing, but it's also a chord tone. And then boom, you end up on that one. And then if you're ending up on the on a note that's a 7th away, that one's a little different. You could do something weird like that, where you do the root, the 5th, then back to the root, and then chromatically walk down the other one, or root 3rd and the same thing. That's one option. You could do root 3rd, 5th, 6th, 7th, root 3rd, 5th. Yeah, so those kinds of things work. Just little simple things like that could work there. So we've covered everything except the major 7th. So major 7th away probably won't happen for a minor chord, but you could do that if you need to. Okay, so we've covered all that, and then you can kind of do the same concepts from a major chord to wherever you're going. So let's say we're going a whole step away. The this note, that note. So there's a root on the first note. We're going back. That's technically in the chord, right? If it's a major 7, coming back to the root. That's a chromatic passing tone on beat 4 that leads us right to D. So if we're going from C to D, that's a whole step away. We got that. If you're going from a major chord to a minor third up, you could just do the arpeggio and then lower it down a half step, because that's a chord tone. Okay, that note, it doesn't matter, but it is a chord tone as well. That's a chord tone, back to a chord tone, but it's also a half step away from where we're going, which is more important. So you could do that, or you could do, again, so going from a major chord to a major third, that one's a little hard because you're trying not to sound redundant. So you're trying not to hit the third before you get there. So that's one way. Root, 7th, 5th, 4th, 3rd. You could also do root, 2nd, flat 3rd going into the major 3rd. That kind of works too. Okay, so if we're going to the 4th, we've done all those. What was it? So you got that, okay. For the sharp 4, probably something like that to get there. Weird, but it works. You're probably not usually going for the sharp 4. You could also walk down the scale. Weird one, but it works. Going to the 5th, you could use that cliche walk up that you hear in blues. You could also go, that sounds like McDonald's. I wouldn't do that one. You could also do root, 7th, 6th, and then land on the 5th. Yeah, so there's a few options you could do to the 5th. The minor 6th, I don't know. That's kind of weird going from major to the minor 6. Let's see. Interesting one. 1, 2, 3, skipping over there and then going up a half step. It'll sound like a surprise no matter how you end up getting to it. You could also double the root and go down, same thing there. Then the major 6th. That's probably the best way. Root 3rd, 5th, add a chromatic passing tone, then you're on the 6th note of the scale. Okay. You could also do root, 7th, flat 7th, 6th, since you're doing it right before you get there. It sounds better to do that over a dominant 7th chord, but you can do that really over either of them. Actually, it sounds better to do that over a major than a dominant 7th, because that's just a quick passing tone getting there. Okay, and then I don't know why you'd be going from a major 7th to a flat 7, but you could just literally do the arpeggio, root 3rd, 5th, major 7th, and end up on the flat 7th. Okay, the major 7th, that's a weird one. I don't think I would do that. I probably wouldn't worry too much about that one perfectly following the rules, because you could just outline the chord and then still end up on the major 7, and it would just sound like you're continuing the arpeggio, but if the other instruments change the chord, it'll work. And then you're back to the octave, so to stay on a major chord and end up back on the same note, you could do root 3rd, 5th, 7th, and then you're there. Also, when you're staying on the same chord, sometimes it sounds nice to walk into another note that's in that chord. So like on the second measure, instead of hitting a C, you could hit an E, right? So that kind of thing. Hopefully this makes sense. I know it's pretty dense, and I'm not really explaining it, you know, in like a logical order, really. But that's kind of the idea with walking lines. So do any of you guys have any questions? Or is there something that you'd like to know other than how to do jazz walking lines? Just kind of any sort of question about the U-bass or anything else? If not, I might go ahead and wrap it up here. But I want to thank y'all for hanging out, and I hope you had a good time. And hopefully you learned something new. Let me know in the comments below if you found this helpful or if it was just confusing. and I can maybe make a follow-up that clarifies some things you have questions about. But thank you for hanging out, and I will see you guys next time. I usually do this the first Thursday of the month. This time around, I had a gig the first Thursday of the month, so I moved it to today. But I hope you'll have an excellent evening, and I will see you guys next time. Take care.